morning, at least from where I'm sitting, for this informational forum on the 2026 California ballot propositions. Like our candidate forums back in February, your regional directors are providing these forums to provide you with information about the issues that are important to Democrats around the state. Whether you're joining us to learn more about the propositions prior to next week's CADEM Executive Board meeting in San Diego, or you are here to learn about our propositions prior to the general election this fall, we are here to discuss the issues, where possible, with the campaigns and to give you the information you need to make your decision to support or oppose the various propositions. This morning, we will look at propositions covering housing and property use, election reform, funding, and we will start taking a look at a couple of the propositions regarding budgets and taxes. We will take on the remaining budget and taxes propositions tomorrow, including the so-called millionaire's tax proposition and the billionaire's tax proposition. We would like to start with an overview of the propositions. First, however, I need to provide this important disclosure that this forum is not sponsored by or affiliated with, authorized by, or coordinated by the California Democratic Party, its executive board, its staff, or any of its official bodies. Nothing in these forums or any related materials should be interpreted as implying the California Democratic Party endorsement, sponsorship, approval, or involvement of any kind. The California Democratic Party is neither liable nor responsible for any information shared at these forums. These forums are an independent project organized by a coalition of individuals who hold the title of regional director, but are acting solely in their individual capacities. Any use of the term regional director is for identification purposes only and does not imply that the California Democratic Party is involved in, connected to, associated with, or supportive of these events. So first proposition, proposition one, and just so you're aware, for the slide deck, we'll be going in the order that they will be appearing in our forums here. So they are not in numerical order. So the first proposition is Proposition 1, the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2026. From the SOS, the Secretary of State, it will issue $11.25 billion in bonds to fund multifamily housing programs, CalVet home loan program, and youth housing. Now, we're also showing on the right side a Democrat's perspective. The Democrat is Alfred Twu, and Alfred says that the proposition would fund housing. $11.25 billion bond for housing includes affordable housing, homeownership for veterans, other home ownership assistance, reducing homelessness, student housing, farm worker housing, and more. The next proposition, Proposition 37, California Middle Class Homeownership and Family Home Construction Act of 2026. Proposition 37, according to the Secretary of State, would establish a second mortgage homebuyer program for qualified homebuyers on qualifying homes and issue $25 billion in bonds to fund the program. From a Democrat's perspective, it will provide funds to help new people build and buy new homes. It will encourage home building, funds low-cost mortgages on new construction or non-residential buildings converted to housing for working and middle-class home buyers who make less than 200% of the area median income and are planning to live in the home, and it's funded by a $25 billion bond. The next proposition, Proposition 45, Building an Affordable California Act, which is an expedited Environmental Review Act. Secretary of State says that it will establish timelines for local and state agencies to review plans and solicit public comment for essential projects such as housing improvements to water supply, transportation, energy, and facilities for health and public safety. From a Democrat's perspective, it will provide faster review of construction projects. Projects would still need to meet zoning, etc. However, Prop 45 would set deadlines for the decision to approve or deny. It applies to renewable energy, utilities such as water and electricity transmission, housing, transportation, education, health and public safety facilities, and broadband internet. It does not apply to fossil fuel projects or jails and other detention facilities. Then we move into election reform. The first election reform initiative that we will talk about is the California Voter ID Initiative. From the Secretary of State, it will require voters to present government-issued identification when casting ballots and require election officials to use government data to confirm voter citizenship and report verification rates. From a Democrat's perspective, it makes it harder to vote, similar to Republican voter suppression laws in other states, and would require voters to provide personal information when voting, even if voting by mail. The next election reform proposition we will look at is Proposition 5, Elections Recall of State Officers. From the Secretary of State, it will eliminate the successor election when a state officer is recalled, thereby leaving the office vacant until it is filled according to state law. From a Democrat's perspective, it will reform the recall process, changes process for filling a vacant seat when a state official is recalled, and if a governor is recalled, the lieutenant governor would move up to be governor until the next election. Proposition 4, public campaign financing. From the Secretary of State, it will allow the state and local governments to create programs that provide candidates with public funds under spending limits and eligibility rules. From a Democrat's perspective, it will allow public financing of election campaigns. Public financing allows candidates to run campaigns that appeal to ordinary people rather than relying on big donors. Currently, only charter cities, typically larger and older cities, can do this. Prop 4 would allow all other local governments and the state government to set up public financing programs, such as matching funds or democracy vouchers. Then we move into funding priorities. We start with Proposition 38, California Immunology Research and Cures Initiative. From the Secretary of State, it will allow state and local governments to create programs that provide candidates with public funds under spending limits and eligibility rules. From a Democrat's perspective, it will fund medical research, funds research into curing cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and other diseases. Funding would go to public universities and nonprofits. $8.4 billion bond measure. Revenue from new medicines would repay the state. Californians would get discounts on these new medicines. Proposition 44, Clinic Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. From the Secretary of State, prohibit healthcare clinics, specifically federally qualified health centers and related organizations, from spending less than 90% of their annual revenue on mission-related purposes. From a Democrat's perspective, it requires clinics to spend more on patient services instead of administration. At least 90% of funds would need to be spent on patient care and other mission-related services. Applies to federally qualified health centers, a type of nonprofit clinic. Then we move on to our first budget and taxes, which is the Save for California's Futures Act. From the Secretary of State, it would increase the Budget Stabilization Account, BSA, also known as the Rainy Day Fund, cap from 10% of general fund revenue to 20%, and excluding deposits into the BSA from the GAN limit. From a Democrat's perspective, it expands the Rainy Day Fund, allows state government to save more money during good years into the Rainy Day Fund. This money is used to cover budget deficits in other years. And then the last budget and taxes we will approach today is Proposition 43, Local Taxes Limitation. From the Secretary of State, requires 2/3 vote by the electorate to enact, extend, or increase local special tax initiatives and prohibit the enactment of property taxes through the initiative process. From a Democrat's perspective, makes it harder for voters to fund local services. It raises the number of votes a special tax created by voter petition needs to pass. Instead of a simple majority, a 2/3 supermajority would be needed. I do want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that the art and graphics for that portion are provided by Alfred Twu, who is a Region 3 delegate and secretary of the California Democratic Renters Caucus. As always, we want to thank Alfred for his amazing artistic talents and his contributions to the Democratic Party. Okay, now, as we get ready for a look at our first proposition, we need to note that although we reached out to the various campaigns, not everyone got back to us to participate in the forums. During the introduction to each proposition, we will note the general positions of those supporting and those opposing it. Beyond that, the campaigns will have had their opportunity to provide their views by participating in this forum, and those that are participating have chosen to make the most of that opportunity. It should be noted when only one side is chosen to appear to speak on the proposition. In many circumstances, it should be obvious that the other side. Okay, so as mentioned previously, the first proposition is Proposition 1, the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2026. So now I'm going to hand it off to Christine because she's going to do this first one.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So Prop 1 is up first. So what does it do? Proposition 1 would authorize the state to issue general obligation bonds to finance the construction and rehabilitation and preservation of affordable housing throughout California. The measure is intended to increase the supply of housing for low and moderate income residents by providing funding for affordable housing developments, while also supporting related infrastructure needed to make those projects possible. As with other general obligation bonds, the state would repay the borrowed funds with interest over time using general fund revenues. Supporters argue that California's housing shortage has driven up costs and made home ownership and renting increasingly unaffordable, and that Prop 1 represents a significant investment in expanding the state's housing supply. Supporters include Governor Gavin Newsom, Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas, Senate President Pro Tem Monique Limon, the California Apartment Association, and the AFL-CIO of California. Opponents argue that issuing billions of dollars in new debt places an additional burden on taxpayers and questions whether bond financing alone would solve the underlying causes of California's housing crisis. Opponents include the Republican caucus of the state legislature. As voters consider Prop 1, they will be weighing the potential benefits of increased investments in affordable housing against the long-term cost of borrowing and broader questions about how best to address the state housing's challenges. Now we will move on to the questions that we would have had. We would have asked either campaign registered for the forum and our Prop Bot speakers. So for these questions, those opposing the proposition will answer first. So the first question, how should voters weigh the cost of borrowing against the potential economic and social benefits of increasing affordable housing?
Everyone agrees California needs more affordable housing. The question is whether adding billions in new state debt is the right solution. Every dollar spent repaying bond principal and interest is a dollar unavailable for schools, public safety, or future priorities. California has already invested substantial sums in housing, yet affordability continues to worsen. Before asking taxpayers to take on more debt, we should fix the policies that make housing so expensive to build and ensure existing programs deliver better results. Borrowing should be a last resort, not the first response.
Okay, thank you. And now for the pro response.
Every major investment California has made, from schools to highways to water infrastructure, has involved borrowing because the benefits last for generations. Affordable housing is no different. The cost of our housing shortage is already enormous. Increased homelessness, longer commutes, higher healthcare costs, and difficulty for teachers, nurses, firefighters, and other essential workers to live in the communities they serve. Proposition 1 allows us to make a long-term investment that creates construction jobs today while expanding housing opportunities for decades. The real question isn't whether borrowing has a cost. It does. The question is whether the cost of doing nothing is even greater. We believe it is.
Perfect. And then the next question was, does Proposition 1 address the root causes of California's housing affordability problem, or does it primarily address the symptoms?
Proposition 1 primarily treats the symptoms rather than the underlying disease. California's housing costs are driven by regulatory barriers, lengthy permitting, environmental review delays, local zoning restrictions, labor shortages, and high construction costs. Simply providing more funding doesn't solve those structural problems. Unless we make it faster and less expensive to build housing of all types, Taxpayers could spend billions while seeing relatively few new homes produced. We should focus first on reforms that increase housing supply sustainably and reduce costs over the long term.
And for the supporters?
California's housing crisis has multiple causes, including decades of underbuilding, rising construction costs, and insufficient affordable housing. Proposition 1 directly addresses one of those root causes by increasing the supply of homes that working families, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities can actually afford. It's true that no single measure solves every aspect of the housing crisis. We also need permitting reform and local planning improvements. But increasing the supply of affordable housing is not treating a symptom. It's addressing a fundamental shortage that has developed over many years.
Thank you. Although we have provided both sides of the issue, we strongly believe that the California Democratic Party should support and endorse Prop 1. Thank you so much. On to the next one.
Thanks, Christine. Now we're moving on to Proposition 37, the $25 billion home buying loan program. What it does is Proposition 37 would create a $25 billion mortgage loan program designed to help middle-income Californians purchase newly built homes. Rather than providing grants, the measure authorizes the state to issue bonds that would finance fixed-rate mortgage loans covering up to 17% of a home's purchase price. Eligible buyers would then repay these loans through their mortgage payments. According to the measure, the bonds would be repaid by the homeowners, not the state's general fund. And the official fiscal estimate concludes there would be no direct state or local government costs. To qualify, our buyer must be a California resident for at least 1 year. They must intend to occupy the home as a primary residence and earn less than 200% of the area's median income. They must purchase a qualifying newly constructed home or the first sale of a converted non-residential property and make at least a 3% down payment. Supporters argue the measure would help more middle-income families become homeowners while encouraging the construction of new housing. Supporters include former Senate Majority Leader Bob Hertzberg, Building a Better California, the tech billionaire-funded committee opposing the billionaire tax, the California Association of Realtors, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, and the Western States Regional Council of Carpenters. Opponents are expected to argue that subsidizing demand may increase home prices, that the program primarily benefits home builders and developers, or that it doesn't address California's underlying housing shortage. Now we will move on to the question that we would have asked as of this week, no one had filed yet to officially oppose this proposition. So now we will move on to the questions we would have asked had either campaign registered for the forum and our PropBot speakers. Again, this is the last proposition we will be utilizing the PropBot speakers. For these questions, we have those opposing the proposition. We're going to actually have those that support the proposition go first. The measure states at home, our question, the measure states that homeowners' mortgage payments, not taxpayers, would repay the bonds. Does that adequately protect taxpayers from financial risk? Our supporter.
One of Prop 37's most important features is that it is designed to be self-supporting. Unlike a traditional state bond that's repaid through tax revenues, these bonds are backed by mortgage payments from participating homeowners. That means the families benefiting from the program are the ones repaying it. The initiative also requires borrowers to make a down payment, occupy the home as their primary residence, and meet income requirements, creating incentives for responsible borrowing. No lending program is completely risk-free, but this proposal is specifically structured to minimize taxpayer exposure while expanding homeownership opportunities for California's middle class.
And in opposition?
The measure certainly tries to reduce taxpayer risk, but saying taxpayers won't pay doesn't make all financial risk disappear. If the mortgage program experiences significant losses, someone ultimately bears that cost. Whether it's investors, future borrowers through higher rates, reduce program capacity, or potentially the state if lawmakers choose to intervene. Large financial programs should be evaluated not only on their intentions, but also on how they perform during recessions. Before creating a $25 billion mortgage program, voters should ask whether those risks have been fully accounted for.
All right, thank you. Next question. What happens if a significant number of borrowers default during an economic downturn? Who ultimately bears that risk? First, we turn to those in support.
Every mortgage program has to account for the possibility of defaults, and California already has decades of experience administering successful housing finance programs. Prop 37 is designed around mortgage lending, where underwriting standards, borrower qualifications, and the value of the homes themselves all help manage risk. The measure does not pledge the state's general fund to repay these bonds. While any lending program faces economic cycles, supporters believe careful program design and prudent lending standards make widespread losses unlikely, while the long-term benefits of expanding home ownership far outweigh that risk.
All right, and those in opposition.
That's the central question voters should ask. During a severe recession, defaults can rise dramatically, as we saw during the housing crisis. If mortgage payments decline, the revenue supporting the bonds also declines. The initiative says taxpayers aren't responsible, but financial markets don't simply ignore losses. Bondholders could absorb some losses depending on how the bonds are structured. The program could require major changes, or future policymakers could face pressure to step in. The measure doesn't eliminate risk, it reallocates it, and voters deserve a clear understanding of who would bear those losses under worst-case economic conditions.
Okay, so that's it for Proposition 37. Although we provided both sides on this issue as well, we do strongly believe that the California Democratic Party should support and endorse Proposition 37. I should also note that this is the last one of the last ones. There's very few of these where we actually, at the very end, indicate that the regional directors believe we should support and endorse. It's not entirely 100%. We did not take a poll of our regional directors, but there are certain propositions that we believe support our democratic values, and in those we will indicate that we believe that we should support and endorse or oppose certain propositions. All right, now I'll turn it over to Christine for Proposition 45.
Thank you so much. So Prop 45, expedited environmental review. So what does it do? Proposition 45 would require California to expedite environmental review and judicial review for specified categories of development and infrastructure projects. Depending on the type of project, the measure establishes accelerated timelines for environmental review, limits delays in litigation, and directs state and local agencies to prioritize processing. Supporters argue that California's environmental review process has become too slow, increasing the cost of housing, clean energy, transportation, water, and other important projects. They contend that Prop 45 would preserve environmental protections while reducing unnecessary delays. Supporters include the California Chamber of Commerce, the California Building Industry Association, BG&E, Southern California Edison, and Building a Better California, a nonprofit organization founded to oppose the billionaires tax and funded by tech billionaires like Google co-founder Sergey Brin, venture capitalist John Doerr, and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Opponents argue that the measure could weaken environmental oversight, reduce opportunities for public participation, and make it more difficult for communities to challenge projects that could have significant environmental impacts. They also question whether faster review necessarily leads to better outcomes. Opponents include the California State Building and Construction Trades Council and Clean and Healthy California, a coalition of environmental advocates. So we do have the questions here. Speaking opposed to Prop 45, we have Sylvia Arredondo with Communities for a Better Environment and Jeremy Smith with the Planning and Conservation League. Thank you for joining us today. So the first question, what problem with California's environmental review process is Proposition 45 trying to solve, and how significant is that problem? Either or can take it.
First of all, Jeremy Smith with the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California, not the PCL, just so everybody's aware of that. And I thought we were going to have a time to have a statement. I didn't realize it was going to be questions and answers.
Jeff, if you want to
Yes.
clarify on that one?
We had not, sorry, we had intended on these particular issues to go ahead and just get to the questions, but we can go ahead and just have a quick 1-minute introduction. And we'll come back to the question.
Okay, Sylvia, do you want to go first like we planned?
Yeah, for sure. Thank
Okay.
you. So good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about Prop 45. Sylvia Arredondo, I'm with Communities for a Better Environment Action, and we're a member of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, one of the preeminent environmental justice organizations in the nation. And I'll pass it over to with me today is Jeremy.
Yep, we're Jeremy with the State Building Trades. We represent 450,000 unionized construction workers in California. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Yeah, so we just want to make note that it's important to remember that Prop 45 was written and funded by corporations and the California Chamber of Commerce. They want to rewrite the rules that govern land use development in California. And so this measure fundamentally shifts power from most project approvals that our communities can have and move this over to private developers. And so it does this.
Thank you. We need to move on to our question.
Thank you so much. Oops.
Oh, wow.
So just an FYI, each question will get 1 minute and 30 seconds for an answer. Apologies for not letting you guys know beforehand on that one too, or just a reminder. So the next question is, how might Proposition 45 affect the construction of housing, transportation, clean energy, and water infrastructure?
Well, it's important to note, first of all, that, Sylvia, if you don't mind if I go, is that okay?
Go for it.
Yeah, that there's already, in the last decade, there have been 209 laws written to speed up the construction of housing in particular. I think the question more is about not how this is going to speed up the construction of things, but what's going to be left behind. How are we going to know that the construction of a thing not only is good for a community, good for the environment, but how are the workers going to be treated building the thing? And when you have to go through CEQA, you answer some of those questions. You answer whether it's good for the community. You answer whether the community where it's going to be built can handle water infrastructure, storm sewers, that kind of thing, can handle the new thing. And we get to talk about, as the building trades at a local board, how are the workers going to be treated? Are they going to be skilled and trained? Are they going to be local? Are they going to be paid living wages? I'll hand it over to Sylvia to answer, take the last 25 seconds.
Yeah, definitely. So we know that most housing in urban areas has already been exempted from CEQA last year under AB 130 authored by Wicks. So to the extent that Prop 45 covers housing, it will primarily apply to sprawl development that are pretty much far from our jobs in urban centers. So I just listen.
Thank you so much. The next question is, thank you. The next question is the state's environmental review system primarily protecting communities, or has it become an obstacle to building needed projects? Jeremy or Sylvia?
Sylvia, do you want to start this one?
For sure. Thank you. So when we're talking about protecting communities, I think it's really important to note that with Prop 45, how it will expedite and ultimately eliminate our environmental review of projects. Our communities, like where I'm at in Wilmington, surrounded by industrial facilities, we see that having CEQA gives us the ability to push forward the best possible projects that communities can, advocate for, to ensure that we do have community benefits, that we are able to reduce environmental health impacts, that we have good clean air quality that's coming from the buildup of these mass projects that can get developed in our neighborhoods. So I'll pause there and see if Jeremy or Gabriel, you want to add in. Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead. Oh, Gabe, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in very quickly to note that while the presentation of this measure was oriented toward clean energy and housing, as Sylvia mentioned, most urban housing is already exempt from CEQA. Most small water systems are equally exempt. Most solar and wind projects are subject to eligible streamlining. This measure is primarily meant to affect data centers, forest clear cutting, freeway expansions, dams, heavy industrial projects, other facilities that we see associated with outsized impacts on the environment and communities, and of course, workers.
Thank you. And then the last question. Can California speed up environmental review without weakening environmental protections? If so, how? Gabriel, Jeremy, or Sylvia?
Well, that's the sort of thing here that nobody's talking about. As I mentioned at the start, there's already over 60 exemptions to CEQA in statute for housing alone. And as I mentioned at the start, there's been over 200 changes to CEQA in the last decade. We believe that this is already sped up. As Gabriel noted, housing is almost, or Sylvia, housing is almost completely exempt from CEQA at this point. We would say that there's a reason things aren't getting built, especially when it comes to housing. It's because developers are making profit decisions, and they're making a profit decision based on the administration in Washington, D.C., based on the price of lumber, based on the price of land, and they don't care about building anything that's affordable or that a community needs in its place. And I'll pause and throw it over to Gabriel or Sylvia if they want to add in.
Yeah, I will add that, Prop 45, it's not necessarily about speeding up timing, right? It's about how we're shifting power from communities, our public agencies, to really mindfully develop in our communities and neighborhoods across the state of California. So this would allow for more polluting projects to be built in our neighborhoods. And so when it comes time to it, it's really shifting the power in our state. And so CEQA is one of the strongest tools for raising concerns about harmful projects.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gabriel, Jeremy, and Sylvia, for joining us today and sharing your information about your opposition for Prop 45. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you. And we will go to the next section, which is election reform. Take it away, Jeff.
All right. The first one that we're going to talk about under election reform is Proposition 39, the voter identification and citizen verification. What it does, Proposition 39 would amend the California Constitution to add new voter identification and citizenship verification requirements. Specifically, it would require voters casting ballots in person to present a government-issued ID. Require vote-by-mail voters to provide the last four digits of a government-issued identification number, such as a driver's license or other government-issued ID number, with their ballot. It would require the state to provide voter identification cards upon request, and require county elections officials to annually report the percentage of registered voters whose citizenship has been verified. Currently, California voters must attest under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens when they register to vote, and their identifying information is verified, but most voters are not required to show ID when they vote. Currently, a voter is required to show ID in California only when voting in person, and they are voting for the first time in a federal election, or they registered by mail or online and did not provide their California driver's license number, state ID number, or the last four digits of their social security number on their registration form. Supporters argue the measure would strengthen election security, improve public confidence in election results, and bring California into line with many other states that require voter ID. Supporters include Reform California, a conservative PAC led by Republican Assembly member Carl DeMaio, Californians for Voter ID, and Republican U.S. Representative Ken Calvert. Opponents argue that voter impersonation is already extremely rare, that existing safeguards are effective, and that new ID requirements would make voting more difficult for some eligible voters, including seniors, students, low-income voters, people with disabilities, and those who do not readily have government-issued identification. Opponents include the League of Women Voters of California, the ACLU California Action, and the California Donor Table, a progressive donor network. This proposition goes against everything we stand for as Democrats, and we couldn't even ask our prop bots to weigh in on it. The proposition supposes that the rampant fraud in the voting system as suggested by the current president is valid, and that Democrats are recruiting massive numbers of non-citizens to vote in our elections. It is racist, and it is false. The questions that we would have asked are, how would Proposition 39 make voting more difficult for eligible voters? And is the conservative argument that voter ID is necessary for election security due to rampant fraud valid, or is it really a form of voter suppression? Christine, I'm going to ask for your thoughts on this issue.
I mean, it's so blindly to see the fact that this is voter suppression, right? Down and through. And so, and we're seeing this obviously from the federal government, and we're seeing with many other states and across the country. And I think it is ill-timed, it is ill-intended. And so I think now more than ever, we need to continue pushing forward and making sure we are accessing the ability for our citizens to be able to vote. So obviously it is unfortunate, but it is what it is. It made it to the ballot. And so I know I strongly oppose 39, and I hope my fellow other delegates, as well as other Democrats across the state, will vote as well to oppose Prop 39.
And I'm with you on that, Christine. The Proposition 39 is just the false flag that the Republicans continue to throw in front of us. They pretend that it is an effort to make it at our elections more secure, that they're going to be more safe. However, except for a minor error in New Jersey recently, there has been very little fraud identified in elections across the country. Millions of people cast ballots every year, and yet only a small number are ever found to be fraudulent. And to be honest, most of those fraudulent votes have been traced back to Republicans who have chosen to vote more than once. So this is simply a false flag operation by the Republican Party. The Democratic Party of California should definitely strongly oppose Proposition 39. It needs to be on our slate card, and it needs to be very adamant that we are opposed to Proposition 39. All right, now I'm going to toss it over to Christine for the next proposition.
Okay, next proposition is, one second.
Prop 5.
There you go. Sorry, I got at it, messed up on my running show. I do apologize. So Prop 5, recall election reform. What does it do? Prop 5 would change the state's recall election process for statewide elected officials, including the governor. So instead of asking voters on a single ballot, both one, whether to recall an official, and two, who should replace them, Prop 5 would split those into two separate elections. If a majority votes to recall an official, the office would become vacant, and a separate election or another succession process established by law would determine the replacement. The recalled official could also run in that subsequent election if otherwise eligible. The measure was placed on the ballot by the legislature in response to concerns raised after California's recent recall elections, particularly the 2021 gubernatorial recall. So supporters generally argue that, one, it fixes the flaw in the current recall system. Under existing law, an official can receive millions of more votes to remain in office than any replacement candidate receives, yet still lose if the recall question passes. Second is the replacement should be chosen in a separate election. Voters can focus first on whether an official should be removed and then decide among replacement candidates if the recall succeeds. Next is it discourages politically motivated recalls. Supporters argue that the current system encourages recalls because opponents have an immediate opportunity to seize office with only a plurality of votes. And lastly, it straightens democratic legitimacy. The eventful replacement would be elected in a dedicated contest rather than emerging from a crowded field with a relatively small share of the vote. Supporters include the League of Women Voters, California Common Cause, and California Secretary of State Shirley Weber. Now, opponents generally argue that it makes recalls more expensive. Holding two statewide elections instead of one increases election costs. It delays replacing an official. If voters remove someone from office, then there could be weeks or months before a new elected official takes office. It weakens an important accountability tool. So critics argue recalls should provide an immediate remedy when voters lose confidence in an elected official. And it could also benefit incumbents or political insiders. Opponents contend the measure changes the rules in response to recent political events rather than improving the process for voters. Opponents include the Election Integrity Project California. The questions we would have asked was would Proposition 5 reduce voter confusion during recall elections, or would it make the process more complicated? And two, under current law, a governor can be recalled by a majority of voters and replaced by someone who receives far fewer votes than the recalled governor originally received. Is that an acceptable outcome in a democracy? So let's discuss. Jeff, what's your take?
All right. So again, we did not have any speakers sign up to speak on either in support or opposed to this proposition. But I think that it's very clear that Proposition 5 would act first time when he came through on the recall ballot.
You're right. And I think that's where, we on constitutional law, we already have something established that in case the governor is no longer in office, we have a succession plan, right? And so in this situation, like let's just say the governor was recalled and the lieutenant governor would become governor until, we have the second election or what have you, right? And so, I mean, I do understand that, having two separate elections could cost a little bit more. But at the same time, to your point though, Jeff, is that, it does create a lot of confusion. I mean, I want to say the last one, obviously in 2021, but even the Arnold Schwarzenegger one, and I think that is literally the best, example of what can happen when this is not enacted, when you do have someone that is elected to office with so fewer votes than the actual person that was elected originally for governorship. So it's those type of situations where, we are very cognizant of the fact that, a vote matters, right? And so if people really do believe that someone should recall, then by all means do it. But at the same time, it cannot create a situation where the person that actually wins it may have less support than the actual person that you're trying to recall, because then that also that's just it's almost a slap to the actual election results from the original election in that case. So and I know even with the 2021 it was a lot of confusion. Okay, well, I don't support the person, but I also don't support any of the other candidates, so to say. And so it's those things, and this would just be very clear cut, a very simple process. Recall yes or no, and if it passes, perfect. Okay, well then on to the next question and who. But until the meantime, we have a succession plan, and again, that that's already in place based on our Constitution itself. So because of that, the Democratic Party should support and endorse Prop 5.
Thanks so much, Christine. All right, now we move on to Proposition 4, the public campaign financing proposition. We do have a speaker for this one, so let's get right into what does it do. Proposition 4, known as the California Fair Elections Act of 2026, would allow California and local governments to establish voluntary public financing programs for political campaigns. Current law generally prohibits candidates from using public funds to run for office. If Proposition 4 passes, candidates who choose to participate would receive public campaign funds, provided they meet strict qualifying requirements, accept spending limits, and comply with additional accountability rules. Public funds could not be used for personal expenses, legal defense costs, or repaying personal loans to a campaign. Supporters argue that public financing would reduce the influence of large donors and special interests, encourage more candidates from diverse backgrounds to run for office, and help voters focus on ideas rather than fundraising. Supporters include California Common Cause, California Clean Money Campaign, League of Women Voters, and ACLU California Action. Opponents contend that taxpayers should not be required to finance political campaigns. They question whether public financing would meaningfully reduce outside spending and argue that candidates should continue to rely on voluntary private contributions. Opponents include the California Taxpayers Association. As voters consider Proposition 4, they'll be asked to weigh competing values: reducing the role of money in politics, protecting taxpayer dollars, expanding political participation, and maintaining confidence in the electoral process. Before we get to the questions, we want to emphasize that this proposition simply removes the restriction in state law on local governments establishing voluntary public financing programs for political campaigns. All right, now speaking in favor of Proposition 4 is Tren Lang of the California Clean Money Campaign. Welcome. Oh, you're on mute, Trent. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Very glad to be here. I think this should be a relatively easy one since the party endorsed the bill SB 42 that put it on the ballot. But I think we all know the problem. Corporations and billionaires have been spending outrageous amounts of money on political campaigns here in California and across the country, especially ever since Citizens United. That makes it very difficult for normal candidates to compete, and they have to spend almost all their time fundraising to be able to do so. Charter cities in California are currently allowed to have public financing systems. 5 charter cities do: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, and Long Beach have good, strong matching funds and democracy voucher systems that help empower voters and allow diverse candidates to compete. But they're banned by this. They were banned in 1988 by a misleading proposition that's banned them everywhere else. So general law cities, counties, and the state itself are banned from having public financing campaigns, unlike in every other state in the country. So as described, Prop 4 just repeals that prohibition to allow any jurisdiction to pass public financing if they want to. So we'd ask you for your support.
All right, thank you for that introduction. Now we move on to our questions. What problem is Proposition 4 trying to solve, and does it solve any problem? Does it solve that problem effectively? You have 1 minute and a half.
Thank you. The problem it's trying to solve is that communities don't have choices to have good public financing systems here in California. That lessens the ability to respond to big money donors and to empower candidates by repealing that prohibition while setting up basic taxpayer safeguards, such as saying that candidates must abide by expenditure limits and meet strict criteria to qualify. It lets counties have the same options to empower voters with public financing campaigns that every other state and charter cities in California actually have.
Okay, thank you, Trent. Should taxpayer dollars be used to help finance political campaigns? Why or why not?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Proposition 4 will not, of course, institute any public financing, so it'll be up to any community and the state itself to ever pass it. But the cost of public financing for taxpayers is generally very low, between $1 and at most like $5 per resident per year. Most people believe that the benefits that has in terms of giving voters more of a say, so that they're not dominated by big money campaign contributors and by super PACs, and then the benefits to governments of not having the other 99.95% of their budgets be influenced by those corporate special interests that currently hold too much sway, is well worth the very tiny taxpayer costs that it would involve.
Got it. Now, what safeguards are necessary to prevent misuse of taxpayer funds or frivolous candidacies for candidates that say file and simply because they want to receive public funds?
Great questions, and Proposition 4 embodies those. The way that public financing systems work is that they require candidates to show a broad base of support, typically from their districts. Proposition 4 includes those requirements, requiring people to meet strict criteria, which specifically requires a set number of small dollar donations. It doesn't set the exact number because we don't want the state to tell individual general law cities how many contributions should be required to qualify. But with those, we have typically seen there hasn't been too many candidates qualifying. On average, 3 candidates qualify per race in the charter cities that have them, which is more than candidates that usually can compete without public financing, but certainly not too many. And these are all qualified candidates that show a broad base of support by the law that Prop 4 will require they have.
Okay. Now, would Proposition 4 reduce the influence of wealthy donors and special interests in these local elections, or would those interests simply find other ways to spend money in elections?
It will absolutely reduce their influence because it will give candidates an opportunity to get their message out without having to rely on them for their fundraising. In Los Angeles, for example, 14 out of the 15 city council members use the small donor matching fund system, which allows them to compete without having to raise money from those wealthy special interests. Yes, wealthy special interests will be able to still spend because of Citizens United, and some candidates will choose not to use it. That's okay. But what we found is that when candidates have enough resources from the public, magnified small donors, for instance, they are able to get their message out and compete and win, even when there are billionaires spending against them.
Okay. Thank you, Trent, for joining us this morning. Again, that was Trent Lang of the California Clean Money Campaign, and speaking in favor of Proposition 4. Now we move on to our next section, Section 3, which is funding priorities, and we start with Prop 38. Christine.
Thank you so much. Prop 38, Biomedical Research Bond. So what it does is that Prop 38 would authorize $8.4 billion in California general obligation bonds to fund research in immunology and immunotherapy, the treatments that use the body's immune system to prevent or fight diseases. The funding would be divided equally between a University of California affiliated nonprofit medical research institute selected by the California Department of Public Health, and a competitive grant program for public and nonprofit universities and research institutions throughout California. The measure requires that at least half of the research funding be dedicated to cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease. It also requires recipients to make drugs and technologies developed through the program available in California at 20% below the national average price. The legislative analyst estimates the bond would cost the state about $500 million per year for 25 years to repay, although future royalties or licensing revenue from successful discoveries could offset some or all of those costs. Supporters argue that the measure would accelerate life-saving medical breakthroughs, create high-paying research jobs, and help make new treatments more affordable. Supporters include Gary Mitchelson, a philanthropist and founder of the California Institute for Immunology and Immunotherapy, Maya Luskin, philanthropist and institute board member, the ALS Association, the Alzheimer's Association, and the Blood Cancer United. Opponents question whether borrowing $8.4 billion is fiscally prudent, whether the state should prioritize medical research over other needs, and whether the promised economic and health benefits are too uncertain. Opponents include Robert Kaplan, former associate director of the National Institutes of Health. Again, we do have, provided an opportunity to have people from both sides, but we do have speaking in favor of Prop 38 is Sandra Lowe with the Prop 38 campaign. Welcome.
Thank you so much. You know, I think your non-partial description is actually the best argument I've ever heard. I mean, on its face, what it does is tries to find a cure for cancer. And if you go to Ballotpedia, you'll find something very interesting that you'll never see on ballot measures. It says no opposition found. It's really hard to find an organization that's dedicated to stop the cure for cancer. So here we are. Why are we doing this then? Mainly because the federal government under the current administration has really stopped all efforts to find cures for cancer, to support immunology, and to support health in general. I mean, we only have to look at who the president has appointed to these various offices that oversee health to recognize that we are in a world of trouble if we don't do something as Californians. So this was put on the ballot by several scientists who believe that making this small investment for the general fund will pay off dividends in the future. And as Christina so, pointed out, anything that comes as a result of the research that turns into a profit in some way is going to go back to pay for the bond. And I just feel like I won the Academy Award. I was hoping that music would come up. I mean, I'd like to thank my no, okay.
I should note that those people who are watching the live stream don't actually hear that sound.
Oh, they don't hear it?
No.
Oh.
We have the Academy Award song at the end of the timer.
Music,
so
right? Okay.
All right.
Pretty much. But thank you so much, Sandra. I appreciate it. So we're going to go to the questions. So the first question is, what unmet need does Prop 38 address, and why is a state-funded bond the appropriate or inappropriate way to address it?
Well, it is the appropriate way to address it because that's how we solve big funding needs in California historically. We have a housing bonds, school bonds. I mean, anytime you have some significant infrastructure that's going to need a long-term effort, that is the appropriate way to do it. This is not one-time money. This is something that has to go on. You have to have an investment. You've got to set up laboratories. This is just the appropriate way to do it. It would be the same for building infrastructure, any kind of underlying support system for California. And this is historically how we do it.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question is, should California play a leading role in funding cutting-edge biomedical research, or is that primarily the responsibility of the federal government and private industry?
Well, absolutely. It's a responsibility of the federal government, but the federal government has decided that it's not their responsibility. And as Californians, we disagree. So we're going to step up. Not only that, is that California has some of the best universities and scientists in the world. So we should be the leaders. I'm really proud if anything comes out of California that can attack any of these serious problems. I mean, it would just be such an honor to say that, we did this as California. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Thank you. Agree. What safeguards should exist to ensure the money is spent on research projects that would bring value to Californians?
Yeah, I mean, this has got some good, strong language in there. First of all, the money will be returned to California, as I brought out. It also limits the administrative cost to 2%, which is as low as I have ever seen in a government program. So this is absolutely 2%. This is going to be the regents and the oversight committee has been established. They will make sure that this is spent in public universities and nonprofits. There is nothing that's going to go to any sort of private organizations. So I think that the safeguards are absolutely in place.
Thank you. And then lastly, beyond healthcare, what impact could Prop 38 have on California's economy, universities, and biotechnology industry?
That's a great question. I get asked that a lot because people say, well, this is a huge amount of money from the general fund. The number one cause of bankruptcy in California is a catastrophic health event. So when you have a catastrophic health event, you have people going into bankruptcy, you have people losing their homes, people losing their jobs, families torn apart, people having to leave their jobs to care for the ill person in their family. So fixing healthcare is it undermines, it makes everything else stronger. It underpins everything. So if we can find solutions to our healthcare crisis, we're going to find solutions to our job crisis, to our affordability crisis, to our housing crisis, so to our homelessness crisis, because so much of that is absolutely dependent on making sure California is a healthier place to live.
Thank you much, Sandra. I could not agree more. But that's again my own personal view. But again, thank you so much, Sandra, for joining us today. And till the next one, Prop 44. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Now, Proposition 44 is the community clinic funding from prescription drug revenues. For this is the only proposition where we have opposing sides that will be speaking on the issue. What Proposition 44 does, Proposition 44 would require certain revenues generated from state prescription drug programs and related pharmaceutical settlements to be dedicated specifically to community health clinics and other safety net healthcare providers. The measure is intended to expand access to primary care, preventive services, mental health care, and other medical services for underserved Californians. Supporters argue that community clinics are on the front lines of providing care to uninsured, underinsured, and low-income patients and need a more stable funding source. Primary supporters are SEIU, UHW. Opponents argue that earmarking revenues in the Constitution reduces the legislature's flexibility to respond to changing healthcare needs and budget priorities. Opponents include the California Primary Care Association, the California Medical Association, Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, and the California Teachers Association. Now, as I get into the questions, one thing I did not mention earlier is that for all of our questions, anytime that we have speakers on our forum today, we do not provide the questions in advance. So these speakers are hearing the questions for the first time as you hear them here. So speaking in favor of Proposition 44 are Gabriel Montoya and Joan Allen from SEIU UHW. And welcome. Go ahead and do your welcome portion, your intro.
Hi, my name is Gabe Montoya, and I'm a regional political organizer for SEIU United Healthcare Workers West here in Southern California. And we represent 125,000 healthcare workers across the state of California that primarily work in private hospitals. And also we do represent workers in Planned Parenthood and a couple of publicly owned district hospitals here in California. And then I'll let Joan introduce herself.
And Joan Allen, SEIU United Healthcare Workers, Government Relations Advocate. And just adding to what Gabe said, SEIU UHW has fought for many years on behalf of not only our workers, hospital workers, clinic workers, medical office workers, but also on behalf of patients. And as we have approached this campaign, it has been in line with that effort to make sure that we are both fighting for every state and federal dollar possible for healthcare patients in the healthcare system, but also making sure that those dollars are spent how they should be, that those dollars are prioritized toward patient care, toward the charitable mission of the employers at which our members work, and that the overall healthcare system is driving toward a more affordable, accessible, and equitable system.
Okay, thank you. And speaking in opposition to the proposition is Joanna Valdez. She is with California Primary Care Association. Welcome, Joanna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Joanna Valdez Castro. I'm Senior Program Coordinator of Grassroots Advocacy with the California Primary Care Association Advocates, and we here at the association, we're a 501c4. We are the lobbying and advocacy arm of our California Primary Care Association, our 501c3, and we represent roughly 2,300 community health centers across the state of California, which provide care to approximately 6 million patients, and oftentimes these are patients that are part of, some of the most underserved in our communities. These are oftentimes communities of color, folks who are on Medi-Cal, folks who are uninsured, and working families. And so we represent these health centers and their interests specifically at the federal and state level, ensuring that the health center voice is part of the decision-making table, both at the state and federal level. And excited to be here.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. All right, now we'll move on to our questions. The first question is, what problem is Proposition 44 trying to solve and meaningfully improve access to healthcare in California? We'll start with the supporters.
Yeah, so, one of the things that, is important to SEIU-HW is that not only are we here fighting to make sure that, workers have good working conditions and a standard of living, but we also fight on behalf of the patients that our members actually serve in their daily work. And so what we want to do is make sure that tax dollars that come from both the federal and state side funding are actually being spent on frontline care of patients. What we don't want to see is we don't want to see tax dollars that come in from the federal government and the state government being spent on, let's say, high CEO executive pay, right? Our pet projects of community clinics that don't necessarily go to the front line care of their patients. Again, these are definitely patients who are some of the most vulnerable folks in our communities. And so we want to make sure that the super majority of dollars that come into these clinics are being spent on care that is meaningful, care that patients can get on time, care that is quality. And we want to make sure that when a patient goes into a clinic, the staffing that they need in order to get that care, the equipment that the workers are able to use on those patients are quality equipment that's being put forth. And we also want to make sure that when patients walk into clinics, it's nice, it's clean, it's ready to serve the patients. And this is what this is really all about. This is about centering care around patients and the people who take care of them.
Sorry, it looks like our timer didn't start, so
yeah,
I'm gonna call time on that one.
I'm sorry, Jeff. So he has about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the problem that we are really trying to solve is to make sure that these clinics are actually following through with their mission, which is, charitable care to the community, frontline care to those that need it the most. And we are going to make sure through this ballot measure that happens and that the patients get the quality care that they deserve, no matter where they come from, no matter what their background. This is centered around patient care and frontline workers who provide that care to them.
Time.
Okay, thank you so much, Gabriel. And now, Joanna, same question. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
What problem is Proposition 44 trying to solve, and would it meaningfully improve access to healthcare in California?
Yes, so community health centers have a mission of serving everyone who comes through their doors, regardless of their background and ability to pay. If passed, Proposition 44 would impose a rigid and arbitrary spending ratio that would require health centers to spend 90% of their total revenue on an extremely narrow set of categories that excludes critical services that support patients. So As you're reading, this initial language, to the average voter, it's a no-brainer, right? But the reality is that this ballot initiative actually excludes funding for important critical services that support patients. And these range from anywhere like transportation and translation services, telemedicine, health enrollment navigators. These are often the individuals at health centers that are helping folks enroll in insurance, whether that's Medi-Cal, Covered California, or whatnot. Appointment referral coordinators and medical technologies such as mammogram, CT, and X-ray machines, all of which are critical to ensuring that folks, are able to access preventative care. These are all critical programs and services that help address barriers to care. As someone whose immediate family relies on community health centers, specifically on the transportation and translation services, I can attest that having these transportation and translation services really help the individual feel more independent and empower patients to be active participants in their care. However, if this initiative were to pass, a lot of these programs and services could be at risk. That would make it much more harder for individuals to be able to actually come to their doctor's appointment and truly understand what it is that their provider is prescribing and how to take care of themselves. Failure to comply with the requirements of this ballot measure would result in penalties that could lead to 50% of health centers closing in the state of California. And again, this would just make it harder for our patients who are in rural communities and urban communities. This would just really decimate the entire healthcare system. And the reality is that even if, the 183.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanna. Now, should revenues from prescription drug programs be dedicated specifically to community clinics, or should lawmakers retain the flexibility to allocate these funds based on changing priorities? I'll start with Joanna this time.
I would defer. I think the health centers are mandated by law to have a majority patient-led board, ensuring that decisions reflect patient and community needs of that specific clinic. In other words, patients themselves are making the decisions. And so thus having, state government regulate these funds, these are oftentimes the people who don't know what it really takes to run a health center, don't know the type of staffing, the types of services and programs that are needed to close barriers to care. And so when you have at the decision-making table patients themselves that are part of these boards, they're really helping make those decisions to ensure that, the funding is going to the programs and services that are really critical to that community that is being served by clinics. And so I would actually argue that, I think having the government step in here is not going to be helpful because they don't understand what it really takes to run a health clinic and to have the programs and services that provide quality healthcare to every patient. My opponent, the other side was arguing, yes, we want to ensure that when patients are coming through our doors, they're coming into clean facilities, and all of that would be at line if this proposition were to pass. And oftentimes these are decisions that lawmakers don't understand themselves because they are not at the health centers. They are not the staff member working at the health center. And so they do not understand what it really takes and the programs and services that really are needed to be able to provide that high quality care that everyone deserves, regardless of their background or their ability to pay.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. And for the supporting side, we'll turn to SEIU UHW. And I do want to point out that before we get started with this, the answer to this question, this is an informational forum, so we do not offer rebuttals. So if somebody says something that you disagree with, we don't offer a rebuttal of any kind. All right, so the supporters, again, the question is, should revenues from prescription drug programs be dedicated specifically to community clinics, or should lawmakers retain the flexibility to allocate these funds based on changing priorities? SEIU.
So I'll go ahead and take that one, and just want to reiterate that it actually is all revenues of the clinic that would need to be spent at this 90% toward the clinic's charitable mission, not just the prescription drug. So this would apply to all revenues, and we feel like that is an incredibly appropriate number, partially because it would provide incredible flexibility for the clinics. So it is not just a narrow patient care. It is also, for example, the translation services, which the state legislature has mandated that all health plans ensure that there is language access for patients. And so that, for example, is a place where the state government has already mandated that in-language appropriate care is a patient care service. So we've been very surprised throughout this campaign, as we've heard from the opponents, that they're claiming translation service wouldn't be covered because the legislature has already said that that is patient care, is appropriate in-language care. And that just keeps coming up over and over again, where there's this dispute as to what counts as patient care. And it really is a lot of places where the legislature already has said, yes, this is something we value. Yes, this is something that counts toward patient care. And so we've been confused by that. But more broadly, clinics will have the ability to set their own charitable mission and include an incredibly broad array. So we feel like this is a very appropriate direction for the clinics to take this money toward patient care, toward their charitable mission. So appreciate that question on legislative flexibility, but a lot of this direction has already been offered. Now it's just taking that next step and making sure it happens.
Okay, thank you. For our next question, does Proposition 44 help reduce disparities in access to healthcare among different communities? We start with SEIU.
Actually, that is part of what the goal is, right? We want to make sure that frontline care is what this money is dedicated to, which would actually really, we believe this proposition actually really pushes the community clinics across the state towards that mission, which is just what you talked about, Jeff, right? We want to make sure folks have access and quality access to healthcare. So we want to make sure that all the things that patients need in order to live, eat, and survive as they are navigating the system are there for them. So, for example, I myself, before coming a political organizer, was an EMT for LA County for 20 years before doing this work. So we just want to make sure that as we set the record straight here, this is going to create that equity. This is going to create that quality, because we do know that patients need things like transportation to and from clinics and home, right? This is what those dollars will go to. What we do know is patients need, for example, x-ray technicians to have equipment that actually works, right? We want to make sure that happens. When we talk to community clinic workers, right, we have heard from them that some of their patients, not only are they waiting weeks to get appointments to be seen in the clinic, when they get to the clinic themselves, sometimes it costs them a whole entire day of work because they're sitting in a waiting room, because staffing issues are coming up and they're not being addressed by the clinics. So what we do know is Prop 44 directing 90% of those dollars to frontline patient care can definitely absolve some of those inequalities in healthcare by making sure that when patients go to the doctor, they're not waiting 3 or 4 hours in the waiting room to be seen because they are staffed up. We do not want the CEOs to be the only ones walking into community clinics and living comfortably in their nice office. What we want is the patients who need care the most to be able to walk in the office, be seen, and not lose a whole day of work in order to see a doctor.
Okay, thank you. And now we turn to California primary care.
Do you mind repeating the question, please?
Sure, absolutely. Does Proposition 44 help reduce disparities in access to healthcare among different communities?
No, it does not. As I stressed, this proposition is crafted in a way that it would exclude funding for critical services that support some of the most vulnerable folks in our community. Again, these are critical programs and services that help address barriers to care. And while these oftentimes these penalties that are going to be imposed on clinics who fail to comply with the requirements of this initiative, according to the Berkeley Research Group, would divert $1.7 billion away from health centers and this would be money diverted from health centers at a time when we are already facing attacks from the federal government. So if anything, this initiative is not going to increase access to care for some of the most vulnerable communities. It's going to take money away from health centers that provide care to these vulnerable communities. And the reality is that if these penalties are imposed, if this initiative passes, more than 50% of health centers across the state are at the brink of closure. The reality is that currently only 19% of health clinic organizations, which is the equivalent to nine, I believe, health center organizations currently meet that spending threshold requirement. And the reality is that if the reality is that out of these health centers that do in fact meet that spending requirement, they're already operating under a negative margin. And so I think that highlights just the impact that this initiative could have in decimating the entire health center safety net infrastructure. And in other words, it's not going to better health. If anything, it's going to make it worse. And, the reality is that health centers close. Where are patients going to go? These are often patients that don't have the funds to go anywhere else. And so as a result, folks will land in the ER with harder to treat conditions that are more costly and will impact all of us Californians when we're trying to access emergency care services.
Okay, thank you. So the next, our last question is, who stands to benefit the most if Proposition if 44 passes? We'll start with the No on 44 campaign.
I would say that nobody is set to win here, because the reality is that this initiative will definitely decimate the healthcare infrastructure. It's going to prevent patients from being able to access quality care, especially our most vulnerable populations. So I don't think it benefits anyone. I think it'll hurt clinics and it'll hurt everyone, regardless of whether you get care at a health center or not. As I just touched, if health centers close and the whole healthcare safety net, is at the brink of closure, well, then the reality is that folks will end up at the ER, and this will impact all of us, because when we're trying to get access to emergency room services, we're going to see our emergency rooms overcrowded, oversaturated, and as a result, wait times for everyone will increase. So this will impact everyone regardless of whether they receive care at a health center or not. So I don't think it will benefit anyone. If anything, it'll hurt all of us Californians who are trying to seek healthcare when we need it the most.
Okay, thank you. And now we turn to the Yes on 44 campaign with SEIU.
Well, first, let me start with who we think it might hurt. It might hurt the highly paid clinic executives who want to, give scare tactics that make people believe that this measure is actually going to close clinics and cause harm to patients. But who we think is going to benefit at the end of the day are the patients themselves, because this is going to direct the frontline care dollars to where it needs to be. And that's to the people who need it the most, the people who came to these community clinics. For example, the penalties that are levied against these clinics, just to make it clear, are not monies that just disappear into the state budget. These monies are actually held into a 5-year escrow, giving a chance for these clinics to actually get up to speed, get up to that 90% spending to patient care. And if they do that, they get those dollars back. And if they can't meet that in 5 years, if they can't direct 90% of their funds to their mission in 5 years, then that money actually goes into a fund that takes care of the staff who wants to get trained, become better at their job, so that patients get better service. So at the end of the day, this doesn't close clinics. All it does is it gives clinics the opportunity to direct the funds where it needs to be. And if they can't do that, they're going to have the opportunity to get that money back when they need it, because they are going to get up to par, to 90%. At the end of the day, the frontline staff who are continuing to work short-staffed, the patients who are continuing to sit in patient waiting rooms, are being seen in facilities where the cleanliness is not up to par, where the equipment is not where it needs to be, where licensed clinical social workers aren't able to direct the care in the right direction, right? With having cases up to 187 cases for one, clinical social worker. These funds will make sure that the staff is hired to adequately care for these patients. It's not gonna make sure that CEOs make more money. It's not gonna make sure that we're buying large pieces of art that look beautiful in lobbies, but it will take care of the patients first.
Okay. That wraps it up for our presentation on Proposition 44. I want to thank Gabriel Montoya and Joan Allen from SEIU UHW, who's speaking in favor of Proposition 44, and Joanna Valdez Castro with the California Primary Care Association speaking in opposition. Thank you all for joining us this morning. So thank you also to our viewers this morning. We are now going to be moving on to Section 4, Budgets and Taxes, Part 1. And the first proposition we'll be addressing is Prop 2. Christine.
Thank you, Varun. part one. So perfect. So Prop 2, Budget Stabilization Act. So what it does, Prop 2, the Save for California's Future Act, would amend California's constitutional rules governing the state's budget stabilization account, commonly known as the rainy day fund. The measure would change how and when the state sets aside money during years of strong revenue growth, increase the maximum size of the reserve fund, and modify the rules for making deposits and withdrawals. Supporters say that the goal to help California better manage its historically volatile budget by saving more during prosperous years so essential year services can be protected during economic downturns. Supporters argue that Prop 2 would encourage long-term fiscal discipline and reduce the need for deep budget cuts during recessions and better prepare California for future economic uncertainty. Supporters include Governor Gavin Newsom, Governor candidate and former Attorney General Javier Becerra, Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas, Senate President Pro Tem Monique Limon, Assembly Member Jesse Gabriel, Assembly Member Abelino Valencia, Senator Melissa Parado, Senator John Lard, California Professional Firefighters, Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, California Hospital Association, and the California Primary Care Association. Opponents question whether the measure would tie up too much money in reserves that could otherwise be used to address current needs, such as housing, healthcare, or education, and whether it gives policymakers the right balance of flexibility and accountability. And opponents also include the Republican caucus in the legislature. The questions that we would have asked of anyone, whether we're proponents or opponents, if they were to show up today or that would have signed up, were what lessons should California take from the budget surpluses of the 2021 to 2023 and the deficits that follow? Does Prop 2 address those lessons? And do you believe that California's budget challenges are primarily caused by spending, revenue volatility, or the structure of the budget itself? And so we're going to discuss a little bit on this. To me personally, I think, it's always important to have, rainy day fund, right? I think in the past years, we've been able to utilize that and be able to, it's almost like a comfort. And I take it as a personal antidote when, like, for us, like, and every day, like, if an emergency comes in, if I have an accident or I'm sent to the hospital, things like that. It's so important. It's always important to have that savings aspect of it, right? For just if anything can happen. And same should also be applied to our local government. And even though, yes, our economy has been pretty well managed. I mean, we are seeing our economy is really strong. I mean, we're always fighting fourth and fifth place in GDP from across the world. But at the same time, we know, and we've experienced the pandemic, we've experienced recessions in the past, and just in our lifetime. And so we always need to be prepared in some way or manner. So I personally do believe and support Prop 2 as a way for us to continue saving more I think it is very important for us to save more during the good years, just so that we're so much better prepared when an unfortunate thing or an economic downturn does happen. So Jeff, your take on this?
I totally agree. I think that it's important for us to set aside more savings. In addition, I think that it's also important that it's going to force the legislature to be more disciplined and structured in how they approach the budget. In the past, when we've had excesses, we've been accused of spending like drunken soldiers. And that's to use a general phrase, but basically it's going to make sure that we don't go out and spend on random projects that won't have future funding. We've gotten into trouble with that a number of times where we've had projects that come up and they were funded during the good times, but then as soon as it comes to the lean times, those are some of the first to get cut, and people start feeling that pain. It's more important, I believe, for us to set that money aside so that we aren't feeling that pain, because even when we do the cuts, those those excess are the first to cut, but we also continue to cut and start harming other areas like education, like healthcare. So we need to make sure that we have the funds that when we have a downturn in the economy, when there is a recession, that we have the savings that the state can go ahead and cover all of those costs on an ongoing basis. So yes, I do believe that we absolutely should be supporting Proposition 2 as we move forward.
Thank you. And that is for Prop 2. And up next is going to be Proposition 43. Take it away.
All right. So Proposition 43 is the proposition that sets a higher threshold for local special taxes. So what it does, Proposition 43 would amend the California Constitution to increase the voter approval threshold for many local special taxes. Under current law, many special local taxes require approval by 2/3, 66.7% of voters. Recent constitutional changes created exceptions for certain local taxes and bonds that can pass with 55% voter approval, particularly for specific purposes such as affordable housing and public infrastructure. Proposition 43 would generally require a 2/3 vote for local special taxes that would eliminate or limit some of those lower threshold exceptions. Supporters argue the measure protects taxpayers by ensuring broad public support before new taxes are imposed. Opponents argue it would make it much more difficult for local communities to fund schools, transportation, affordable housing, public safety, and other local priorities. So, as far as speakers go, speaking in opposition to the propositions is Jeff Gazzo, a consultant who formed the No on 43 campaign. And Jeff, if you would mind, please correct me on this pronunciation of your last name and go ahead and introduce yourself and the No on 43 campaign.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all the other regional directors for pulling this together. Jeff Gazzo. I'm with No on Prop 43. And our campaign is building a broad and diverse coalition led by SEIU California, the California Professional Firefighters, California Calls, larger community group organizations that we're wanting to bring into this, because while this measure that proponents try to describe as just closing a loophole, it really does fundamentally rewrite the rules of our democracy. So here's what it does. So today, when your community circulates a local initiative petition to fund something specific, affordable housing, a neighborhood school, a road repair, the majority decides. Prop 43 changes that. It says the majority is no longer enough, letting just 1/3 of voters block what everyone else wants. Under Prop 43, a no vote would count twice as much as a yes vote. So you could have 2 out of every 3 of your neighbors vote yes and still lose. That isn't fair, and it isn't democracy. And think about what's at stake in our communities. So let's take housing as an example. Local governments like the city of Los Angeles have voted to build affordable homes for working families, for seniors, for veterans, to help renters stay in their homes and to move people off the streets. In the middle of a housing crisis, that's the last thing we need. It's the same for other crucial issues that make our communities work.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, I do want, before we get into the questions, I do want a clarification from you. You said during the introduction that it's 2/3 versus a majority. Now, my understanding is that it's 55%. So it is a little bit more than a majority for the local taxes currently. Would it drop back to 50% or would it be the 55?
No. So local bonds for schools, school districts for facility repairs can pass at a 55%. But this doesn't have anything to do with local bond measures to build schools. This has to do with passing revenues to fund local services. And right now, citizens can come together, circulate a petition, place that on the local ballot, and there's been measures in communities all over the state, and pass that with a simple majority 50% plus one vote.
Got
And
it.
measures like Measure ULA, there was a fire measure in Los Angeles to fund fire service, a parcel tax that was passed in the city of San Francisco to fund schools and childcare. I mean, cities around the state are passing measures to fund priorities and services that our communities need. So
Got
this
it.
would increase that threshold to limit voters' ability to be able to fund essential services.
Okay. So thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate it. So moving on to our questions, should constitutional protections against new taxes prioritize taxpayer rights, or should they prioritize the ability of communities to solve local problems?
Great question. Prop 43 is not about prioritizing taxpayer rights. It's not about prioritizing services either. This is about making it harder for communities and individuals to exercise their right and fund services. Prop 43 doesn't lower one specific tax. It fundamentally changes the rules to benefit those entities like corporate interests that don't want to pay higher taxes, empower them to be able to spend resources to get a lower threshold and empower a third of our community. And when you think about how large the MAGA vote is in California, I mean, that's a third of voters, right? We do not want to be in a place where empowering a small minority of voters to give voice over the majority to fund services is where we're at. And that's why we're asking for a no vote.
Got it. Thank you. Next question. How would Proposition 43 affect local decision-making and community self-governance?
Quite frankly, I mean, it would fundamentally negatively impact local decision making. I mean, this is limiting the ability for voters to raise revenues to fund essential services. It's going to make it harder for local governments to plan and provide those services that people come to expect. Right? Local governments are totally underfunded today and are struggling to provide the level of services that they're providing. And that's which we all know. And when you talk to people in the community, that those services don't reach the number of people that we need to reach. So this is a dramatic impact to both, the ability for communities to plan and deliver the essential services we need.
Okay. Which communities, urban, suburban, or rural, would be most affected by raising the approval threshold, and why?
I mean, this would impact every community equally in California because it applies unilaterally to any jurisdiction, city, or county in the state of California where a group of citizens want to come together to pass money to fund specific public services, whether that's firefighting services, whether that's childcare, whether that's to provide more funding to ensure that school employees and school staff, right, are adequately compensated. So this is an equal opportunity offender, and why we're asking for you to vote no on Prop 43.
Okay, thank you. Now, is a 2/3 vote threshold an appropriate safeguard for taxpayers, or does it allow a relatively small minority of voters to block projects supported by most of the community?
We fundamentally believe that this empowers a small minority at the expense of the majority, right? Our democracy is built on the idea of majority rule, and this empowers fundamentally a small group of people where two of your neighbors can be outruled by one. That's not fair. It's not democracy, and why we're asking you to vote no.
All right. Thank you, Jeff Gazzo from the No on 43 campaign. Thank you for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. So that wraps up our forum this morning. I do want to thank my co-regional directors, Christine Salazar from Region 15 and Lee Miller from Region 4 for helping us this morning. Lee did a lot of behind the scenes work to get this going today. You obviously saw Christine and myself throughout the forum this morning. We'll also be, again, tomorrow morning, we will be coming together to sorry, I'm just looking through my notes here. We'll be coming together for an additional forum where we're going to be talking about other budgets and taxes propositions. We'll start off the day with Proposition 3, the millionaire's tax. Then we'll go into Proposition 40, the billionaire's tax, and address the related Proposition 41 and 42. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning. This is Jeff Kurtzen in Region 3, and just want to wish you a great day and hope we see you tomorrow morning. Thanks, everyone. And one moment. Okay, we are out.